what would you do if you had a civilian population for 18 years and you were a death cult and you ruled it? You would teach what Hamas taught in Gaza, which was to teach the young Gazan Palestinians how to join the death cult, to admire it, to be part of it, so that when...
To strive for attainment within it.
For it. It's all very well documented, but the soldiers who were going house to house in 2014, there was a relatively minor war in Gaza compared to this one. And there are many soldiers I spoke to who were involved in the relatively minor conflict in 2014, who were also in Gaza since October 2023. They all said that they noticed when they did house-to-house clearing, going through, trying to find hostages, trying to find weapons, trying to find tunnel entrances, and trying to find the architects of the massacre. They all said the same thing, which was that in 10 years, there was a marked radicalization in the books, in the households, in the learning materials, in everything from, and it's not satire, math textbooks of, if you kill 2 Jews and kill another 2 Jews, how many dead Jews do you have? This is the way you learn arithmetic in Gaza under Hamas.
What if everything you thought you knew about good and evil was a lie? Douglas Murray detonates the comfortable delusion of banality, revealing a horrifying truth. Some monsters want to be monsters. Witness the ecstatic worship of death, celebrated on live stream, a Diet Coke, a slaughtered family. Are you ready to confront the abyss? Or will you keep pretending it doesn't exist? This changes everything.
That because how the hell else are they going to expiate the guilt?
Absolutely. But here is a way.
Yep.
And with the added thing that the Iranian proxies across the West, the Qatari money that has flooded through Western universities, not least American universities,
the propagandists,
the organized movements. It's not an accident that the same movement crops up everywhere with exactly the same slogans. Is it generic that students at Princeton again the other week are chanting "Glory to our martyrs"? This is totally imported propaganda just placed over them, and these dolts repeat and repeat and repeat. But all of this has been done so expertly because it plays to the psychological weakness that exists in so many people in the West who have been taught their guilt, have been taught culpability with no means of getting rid of it. But here you have a means.
Culpability with no virtue. That's one of the most striking examples of that, I believe, is, I was probably 40 bloody years old before I knew who Wilberforce was.
Right.
To my eternal shame, it's all part and parcel of the message that the Western colonial powers were responsible for slavery, when the truth of the matter is that the Great Britain in particular, waged war for 175 years on the high seas to eradicate slavery for the first time in history?
We not only eradicated, the British, not only eradicated it in the British Empire, but eradicated it on all the high seas.
Right.
And lost thousands of sailors throughout the 19th century. And every British household paid far more in household goods throughout the 19th century because we weren't trading with slave traders.
Right.
Compare that, by the way, to the fact that
there's
at the same
reparations.
At the same time, the Islamic world was glorious.
Foreign propaganda expertly exploits a psychological void created by an education that teaches only culpability, never virtue. Students learn of slavery's sin, but not of Wilberforce, who led Britain's costly century-long war to abolish it. This creates an unshakable guilt. With no path to redemption, students grasp at imported slogans like "Glory to our martyrs," mistaking them for a noble cause.
Slaving away, and much of the Islamic world still does, by the way, across Africa and the Middle East, is still doing slaving. So
unrepentantly and with no apology whatsoever.
But positively beaming that at the same time they can teach people in the West that Westerners born in the 21st century are guilty of 18th century slaving. So this is an extraordinarily dangerous moment, it seems to me, because the ground that you and I and others have identified for many years of deracination, of populations, demoralization of populations, stripping away of all legitimate heroes or ignorance of them, whether it's Wilberforce or Churchill or anyone else, that the stripping away of the heroes, stripping away of the national story in country after country across the West leaves this vacuum.
Canada leading the pack, perhaps.
Canada, perhaps the world leader.
Australia, New Zealand, they could compete.
They're doing very, very well.
They are.
But into this vacuum, something was always going to step. And there is no reason why American or other Western universities or streets, because it's not just at higher education institutions, it's, Union Station in New York shut down again the other week by hundreds of people chanting for Intifada.
Yeah.
Intifada terrorism in the center of New York. What it is there's no reason why this death cult ideology should find itself worshipped in the free West, apart from the fact that we have allowed ourselves to be deracinated and demoralized and allowed the weakest and most pernicious imaginable ideology to step into the vacuum.
Yes, an assortment of weak and appalling ideologies.
Douglas and Jordan explain how we have demoralized ourselves, erasing our heroes while obsessing over historical sins. This has created a spiritual vacuum, eagerly filled by a foreign death cult that ignores its own slave-trading past. The result is Westerners chanting for Intifada on the streets of New York. A pernicious ideology has filled the void left by our own self-immolation.
Most particularly the idea that the world can be explained in consequence of the oppressor-victim narrative.
Yes, oppressor oppressed, colonizer colonized.
Yeah. Proletariat, bourgeoisie, it's the same bloody story.
There's another strand to that, by the way, which I gave a lecture on this in New York last year for the New Criterion, which is that even if somebody does use the term evil in the West these days, and people are very uncomfortable about using it because of its theological framework, if you do hear the word evil used in the West, in the Western press, I give examples of this, what will people describe it as? Almost inevitably, they will resort to Hannah Arendt's lamentable definition of the banality of evil. And if anyone's interested, they can go and read the essay online that I wrote about against Hannah Arendt's appalling, misguided, and provably wrong theory on the banality of evil, which she applied to Eichmann, the leading Nazi and architect of the Holocaust.
The facade is banal.
There was nothing about Eichmann that was banal. He just fooled Hannah Arendt. But she through her half-baked theory, that's the last bit of the use of evil I notice in the public realm. Something will happen, like, for instance, when drummer Lee Rigby was beheaded in broad daylight on the streets of London in 2013. The next day, a columnist at the Telegraph, a conservative newspaper in the UK, described the act as banal. The Guardian.
That means it didn't happen to him.
Said it was a sort of yes, exactly. It's hard to see decapitation as banal, unless you just have no other word to use in the environment of evil.
The West has lost the language of evil, substituting it with Hannah Arendt's misguided theory of the banality of evil. Arendt was fooled by Eichmann's banal facade, and her theory allows us to avoid confronting calculated ideological malevolence. The absurd result is a modern commentator describing a public beheading as banal, a comfortable delusion that pretends true. Horrifying evil simply doesn't exist.
One of the things I want readers to come away from On Democracies and Death Cults thinking about is exactly this. Maybe there is such a force in the world. Maybe evil really does descend. Maybe it actually exists.
So when did you decide, when did you come to that conclusion? Like what, and is that a theological conclusion? I mean, when you start talking about the landscape of good and evil, you're perilously close to the religious world, or you're in it.
Yeah,
you know, when I
absolutely.
dealt with my clinical clients that were severely hurt by malevolent actors, the language became religious because there was no other way of discussing it.
Yes.
And that had nothing to do with my machinations. there was no language they could use to describe what happened to them
Yes.
that wasn't profound enough to touch on the religious, because the depth of horror was so great that no
Yes.
other language sufficed.
Well, I would say one of this, and you know this well from your work on the Bible, but one of the things I suppose that would stand out as a definition of evil is doing it knowingly and gleefully and glorying in it. And that's one of the things.
There's a level underneath that. It's doing it knowingly and gleefully to spite God. Right. You don't understand evil. I don't think you understand evil if you don't understand it as the ultimate in rebellion against the fact of existence itself, the spirit of existence. Well, hence death cult.
Well, that's right? But then the layer underneath that is where death is offered up as a form of worship. Now, this is something the Western mind finds incredibly hard to understand within the death cults within Islam.
Peterson tiptoes around evil, but Murray shoves us into its horrifying core. He's not being poetic. He's describing the manual for Islamic death cults. This isn't just violence. It's the ecstatic worship of death, a rebellion against creation itself. We saw Hamas livestream their gleeful October 7th carnage as a holy sacrament. How the hell do you negotiate with a sacred death rattle?
Have some understanding about it when this arises in the form of Nazi fascism or Soviet communism, some understanding, or Maoist communism, even less understanding. But
or serial killing pathology.
Serial killers. We could. I think we still might be able to identify Jeffrey Dahmer, or the Yorkshire Ripper as
worshippers of death and suffering, right? Sadism taken to its extreme.
But imagine that with a theological framework around it, such as the kind the jihadists have. This is why, when you ask why I sort of was mulling on this, it was because of something I couldn't get out of my head from the 7th onwards, which was that I've seen quite a lot of war and how people act in war, and regard myself as relatively unshockable, or at least aware of the capacity of human evil. But from the moment I started seeing the videos that Hamas took themselves on the morning, and I started seeing them very early, I then saw an awful lot of them, and then far more, even before going to the massacre sites myself, and the hospitals and the morgues and so on. But one of the things I could not get out of my head was the glee, the sheer orgiastic glee of the terrorists.
At least the Nazis tried to hide their crimes.
Well, this is a point I've made that has occasionally got me into trouble. It's not. What happened on the 7th was as if, for some hours in Treblinka, the Nazis had live-streamed to the world what they were doing.
Right.
And were proud of it and wanted everyone to know.
And then the universities celebrated it.
I quote a late friend of mine early in the book, as you know, who fled Nazi Germany, Nazi Austria in 1938.
Murray absolutely nails it, the Nazis, for all their monstrous evil, at least had the shame to hide their death camps. Hamas live-streamed their abattoir, high-fiving over desecrated corpses as a religious rite. Meanwhile, our own woke warriors in their ivory towers celebrated the savagery as decolonization. This isn't resistance. It's a snuff film sponsored by Tenya. What the hell is the context for that?
And he said towards the end of his life to me and to a historian friend, he said that he had spent his last years thinking, actually, maybe there was a level of anti-Semitism even worse than the Nazis.
And hell is a bottomless pit,
Absolutely.
Really.
And it required somebody who had fled Nazism and lost much of his family to Nazism to be able to, in a way, make that point. But the thing, we don't need to get into the competition of, as it were, which is how people see it, but it doesn't diminish anything. But this thing of the ecstasy in death, the ecstasy in bringing death. I quote the young man who phones back to his family in Gaza on a cell phone and says, Father, Father, I've killed 10 Jews with my own hands, I've killed 10 Jews. Get mother on the phone. Mm-hmm. Turn on to WhatsApp video. I can show you. The endless cries of Allahu Akbar, which, as I said shortly after the 7th, is not something I wanted to hear chanted on our streets much more, knowing this isn't simply an offering of prayer like the Lord's Prayer. And if Christians had in recent memory been massacring people whilst screaming the Lord's Prayer in ecstasy, I think that Christians would have the decency to pipe down a bit about shouting it in public squares en masse. But the cry of Allahu Akbar that we're forever told is simply like, it's just a prayer. Like saying Sieg Heil in America is just a quoting of German. The use of Allahu Akbar by the terrorists as they're removing a young man's head with a shovel or raping girls and then killing them.
That cry of Allahu Akbar, it's not a damn prayer when screamed over a young man being beheaded with a shovel. Murray demolishes the sanctimonious bullshit we're fed. This is religious ecstasy, a death-worshipping cult. The terrorist even calls Dad to brag about his score of 10 dead Jews. This isn't politics. It's a holy bloodlust. So when will the media stop pretending it is?
And the most
effective,
effective cover story for the worst acts of sadism is precisely the use of God's name in vain, right? Because then you combine the worst possible sin, which is demeaning of what's most high, with the worst possible action, with its gleeful delight in the suffering of others. And what do you get? You get 2 for 1 if you're on the side of the sadists. You know, when psychologists started to study the manifestation of psychopathy in the normative population, they identified 3 cardinal traits to begin with. Machiavellianism, use of language for instrumental purposes. Mm-hmm. If I'm a Machiavellian, the only reason I'm communicating with you is to gain something only for me now, right? No communicative intent other than that, right? So it's a false offering. Psychopathy, so that's parasitical predation, right? And narcissism, the desire for unearned status. Okay, well, that was the dark triad, but they had to add sadism to it because those 3 things in combination appear to inevitably lead to sadism, which is exactly that gleeful delight. And then once you've compiled those 4 demonic traits within you, once you've turned yourself over to that spirit, why wouldn't you claim that you were doing it in the name of what's highest? How the hell else would you live with yourself? How would you not stop your soul from shredding? Well, and it is part of that satanic delight to take what's highest and to subvert it most entirely.
Yeah. These are bottomless pits, as you say, Jordan, but there is something I think one can say about the awareness of what you're doing as being wrong to this extent, that and still enjoying it. There's a story
You're enjoying it because it's wrong, right? That's part of that.
And
pride.
also with another layer.
Peterson's Dark Tetrad is like a college lecture. These animals aren't just sadists with a cover story. They're following a divine instruction manual for evil. Murray knows the thrill isn't just killing, it's the satanic joy of dragging God's name through the blood and guts of innocence. This is Islamic jihadism's holiest sacrament. When do we stop analysing and start fighting?
Which is that you have been taught that the people you're doing this to are subhuman.
Yeah, and you're pretty damn willing to learn it too, because boy, that gives you absolute license to do whatever the hell, whatever possesses you wants you to do.
There was a rather heavy, I'll do it quickly, but a rather heavy day when I went in to see the Hamas terrorists that had been captured alive. And one of them I recognized. And that was a moment where I really did think again about the nature of evil. And yes, it's hard not to think of it in a theological context in this. There was a a family who on the 7th were in their home in a small community in the south, and the oldest boy was a teenager, had already gone to the beach with friends, and a landing craft of Hamas came in and they killed him and his friends. And then they went to the community, and the father of the family was there in the house and ran into the bomb shelter with his 2 teenage sons. I think the boys were 10 and 12 or thereabouts. And the terrorists came in, and the father, I've seen the video several times, it's pretty gruesome, but the father takes his 2 sons into the bomb shelter with him, and the Hamas throw a grenade in. And the father threw himself onto the grenade to save his sons. And they come out of the shelter staggering, I mean, both in their underwear, and one of them, his eye had been blown out of his socket, and the other one had lost his hearing. His ear was off. And they come into the main room of their house, and again, it's all on video. And they're both completely
subhuman. That's the whole point. These aren't just killers. They're religiously indoctrinated death cultists who've been taught that Jews are less than cattle. Murray saw the Hamas terrorists who blew a father and his sons to bits. This is about an ancient hatred fueled by theology. When will we admit that this isn't a land dispute, but a holy war?
Disorientated, of course. One of them is saying, "Where's father?" And the other one is saying, "Didn't you see him?" And then the terrorist who killed their father walks into the room with a Kalashnikov and just looks at the boys, goes to the fridge, opens the fridge, and gets out a Diet Coke and starts drinking it in front of them. Mm-hmm. And also later asks where their mother
That's
is.
how you demonstrate that the suffering is irrelevant. Right. With that casual consumerist gesture.
Yes.
Right. And that, what would you say? That perversion of hospitality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So inevitably, yes, you get to the question of how does so many people get taught this or encouraged into this? And I was very struck. This is very much in your wheelhouse, but one of the reunions of the survivors of the Nova Party, I got talking to a remarkable woman who was a therapist who was working with them. And these were, of course, all deeply, deeply traumatized young people who were, have difficult time for the rest of their lives. But there was a therapist who'd been working with them who I spoke with who said to me then, and it was something I thought about a lot, which was, don't forget, Douglas, that a psychopath is probably born. Sinois was a type of psychopath, clearly. But she said, don't forget, sociopaths you have to make. And that was something I thought about a lot because, of course, what would happen if you had control of a civilian population like the almost 2 million people in Gaza, a population that doubled in the time that Israel was said to be doing a genocide there, by the way, but park that aside as a mere fact. What would you do if you had a civilian population for 18 years?
A Diet Coke. The terrorist walks in, slaughters a father, and cracks open a goddamn soda in front of the orphaned sons. Douglas Murray slams the obscenity of it all. 2 million Gazans indoctrinated, minds warped. Sociopaths are made, not born. When will the world wake up to the horror show that Hamas is running in Gaza before it's too late?
And you were a death cult, and you ruled it. You would teach what Hamas taught in Gaza, which was to teach the young Gazan Palestinians how to join the death cult, to admire it, to be part of it, so that when...
To strive for attainment within it.
For it. It's all very well documented, but the soldiers who were going house to house in 2014, there was a relatively minor war in Gaza compared to this one. And there are many soldiers I spoke to who were involved in the relatively minor conflict in 2014, who were also in Gaza since October 2023. They all said that they noticed when they did house-to-house clearing going through, trying to find hostages, trying to find weapons, trying to find tunnel entrances, and trying to find the architects of the massacre. They all said the same thing, which was that in 10 years, there was a marked radicalization in the books, in the households, in the learning materials, in everything from, and it's not satire, math textbooks of, if you kill 2 Jews and kill another 2 Jews, how many dead Jews do you have? This is the way you learn arithmetic in Gaza under Hamas.
When the math is this twisted and the textbooks are stained with hate, what hope is there for peace? What choice does Israel have? So, any thoughts on what Douglas Murray just discussed? Share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you never miss any of our future debates.